I sold everything I owned to save my husband's life, and on the very day he finally got better, he told me he didn't need me anymore. Mark stood in the middle of our kitchen in Cincinnati, Ohio, folding his clothes into a neat little stack as if he were packing for a weekend getaway, not walking out of a 24-year marriage. Afternoon light hit the empty walls, glinting off the pale rectangles where our family photos once hung. I could trace them with my eyes, the ghosts of a life dismantled one nail at a time. He didn't look at me while he packed. "Linda, this is for the best," he said, voice smooth and rehearsed. "You'll see. We both need a change." A change. That was the word he chose, after I'd sold our house, our car, my mother's jewelry, everything, to pay for his treatment. 2 years ago, he could barely stand. I spoon-fed him broth and whispered promises that everything would be okay while he trembled in his hospital bed. When the doctor finally said remission, I cried so hard it felt like my ribs might crack. And now here he was, strong, healthy, wearing cologne I didn't recognize. "I did everything I could," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I sold the house to keep you alive, Mark." He folded another shirt and dropped it into the suitcase. "You didn't keep me alive, Linda. The doctors did. You just paid the bills." His words hit like a fist through my chest, fingers closing around my heart. Just paid the bills, as if I hadn't sat awake every night praying the monitor wouldn't flatline. As if love were something you could itemize, like charges on a receipt. "You're really leaving?" I asked, even though I already knew. He paused, glanced toward the front door, and gave a smile I hadn't seen in years. The bright, careless smile of a younger man, a smile that no longer belonged to me. "Her name's Emily," he said quietly. "She makes me feel alive again." Emily. I didn't know her yet, but her name hit like ice water. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to ask why, but instead I gripped the edge of the counter until my hands went numb. I had learned long ago that losing your temper only made men feel justified in leaving. "What about Jason?" My voice came out barely above a whisper. "Our son?" Mark zipped the suitcase shut and finally turned to look at me. "He understands. We talked." The words felt like they twisted inside my ribs. "You talked to Jason about this?" He nodded, eyes avoiding mine. "He said you can be too controlling. That I should do what makes me happy." Controlling, the word dropped into me like a stone. My own son, my baby, the boy I used to carry to preschool when the car wouldn't start, calling me controlling. After all the lunches I packed, the loans I paid, the overtime shifts I worked so he would never have to struggle. Now I was the problem. I swallowed hard. "He said that?" Mark shrugged and adjusted his watch. "He thinks you need space. We all do." Space. Another neat, polite word for exile. When the doorbell rang, my stomach dropped. Mark's eyes lit up with a joy he no longer saved for me. "That'll be Emily," he said. "She's helping me move." I stayed frozen as laughter floated down the hallway, light, musical, completely out of place in my home. And then she stepped into my kitchen like she already belonged there. Emily was younger, maybe 35, with glossy hair and a dress that looked expensive. Her perfume drifted across the room, too sweet, too bright. She gave me a polished smile, the kind people practice in mirrors. "You must be Linda," she said, extending a manicured hand. "Mark has told me so much about you. You're incredible. Selling everything for him, that's something." Something. I didn't take her hand. My throat burned too badly to speak. Mark laughed, loud and awkward. "She's always been generous. That's Linda, always taking care of everyone." "Of course," Emily said, head tilted. "Mark mentioned you don't really have anywhere to go now. That must be scary. Do you have a plan?" Her words were sugar, her eyes sharp as glass. "I'll figure it out," I managed. "Oh, I'm sure you will," she said, glancing around the half-empty kitchen. "Strong women always do." Strong women, another way to say alone. Mark sealed the last box and turned to me. "Take care of yourself, Linda." And just like that, they walked out. He didn't look back once. The slam of the car door echoed through the house, louder than thunder. I stood there watching the taillights fade, my breath fogging the cold window. For a long time, I didn't move. The silence felt unbearable, broken only by the low hum of the refrigerator, a lonely, mocking sound. The kitchen table was bare, except for an empty coffee cup and a stack of hospital bills I still hadn't thrown away. I sat down and stared at my hands, the same hands that signed the sale papers, washed his dishes, typed desperate emails to insurance companies. The same hands he once held, squeezing hard, thanking me for saving his life. Now they trembled. Something inside me shifted. Not anger, not yet, but a hollow, crystalline clarity. I wasn't just a woman whose husband left her. I was a woman who had paid for her own disappearance. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, relentless. It drifted across the driveway where Mark and Emily had driven away, covering everything in white. Peaceful, almost gentle, like a blanket tucking in the ruins of what used to be my life. I stayed there until the light faded and the house went dark, the only movement the shadows of falling snow across the window. Somewhere far away, a car horn sounded, and I wondered whether he heard it too, or if he was already laughing in some warm restaurant, holding her hand, telling her I'd understand someday. I smiled through the tears that finally came, thin, bitter, knowing. He was right about one thing, I would understand, just not in the way he imagined. The wind that night sounded like it was trying to tear the world apart. I sat in the driver's seat of my old sedan, parked behind a closed grocery store, watching the rain smear the windshield into a trembling sheet of gray. The air smelled like wet pavement and gasoline, and I couldn't tell if the shaking in my hands came from the cold or from the silence that followed me everywhere now. It had been 3 days since Mark left, and the house no longer felt like mine. His laughter, his voice, even the rhythm of his footsteps, all of it had been replaced by a hollowness that rang louder than any fight we'd ever had. The real estate agent's check from selling our home sat in my bag, almost drained by medical bills. What little remained wouldn't cover more than a month in a decent apartment. I kept thinking about how fast everything can vanish when love decides it's finished with you. I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel and stared at the dashboard clock. Almost midnight. My phone buzzed, and for one reckless second my heart leapt, thinking maybe it was Jason, but it wasn't. Just another automated bank alert about a payment I'd forgotten to cancel. I deleted it without opening it. Earlier that day, I'd tried calling my sister Debbie. Her husband answered instead. His voice carried that uneasy kindness people use when they're trying to shut a door without slamming it. He said Debbie needed time to process things. I knew what that meant. Mark had gotten to them too, told them his version of the story, painted me as overbearing, impossible, too much to handle. I could practically hear him saying it in that perfectly calm tone he used when he wanted to make sure everyone took his side. Mark just needs space, her husband said. You both do. Space. Everyone wanted space. From me. I hung up before he could say anything else. His words stung like icy rain on bare skin. It felt like every person I had ever loved had turned me into a burden overnight. The more I gave, the faster they pulled away. The storm outside tightened its grip, rain hammering the car roof like thrown pebbles. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself, trying to reclaim some scrap of warmth. The heater had died days earlier, and the interior smelled like damp fabric and old fear. I told myself I'd only sleep here for one night to clear my head. By morning, my neck throbbed, and condensation clung to the windows like frost. My clothes were cold against my skin, and my shoes were still wet from stepping into puddles on my way into a diner to wash up. The waitress gave me a soft, understanding smile when I ordered a coffee, but I noticed how her gaze lingered on the suitcase by my feet. I couldn't blame her. I looked like someone who no longer belonged anywhere. Later that afternoon, I sold the car. The dealership clerk counted the cash slowly, deliberately, before sliding a smaller stack across the counter than I'd hoped for. $400, he said. You sure you'll have a way home? I nodded, even though I didn't have one. I walked out into the gray afternoon with my suitcase dragging behind me and the sky threatening another downpour. By the time I reached the bus stop, the storm had returned with a vengeance. I tried to shield my bag under my coat, but the wind tore at everything. The streets were nearly deserted, save for the occasional car plowing through deep puddles and sending waves across the curb. I sat on the cold metal bench beneath the tiny shelter and listened to thunder roll across the buildings. And there, in the middle of that storm, something shifted. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was resentment, steady and quiet, but undeniably alive. Resentment for Mark, for Jason, for Debbie, for every time I said yes when no sat heavy in my throat. For all the years I swallowed disappointment because that's what a good wife, a good mother, a good sister was supposed to do. The storm felt almost intentional, like the sky wanted to show me just how small I'd let myself become. My hands were numb, but my mind wouldn't stop replaying Mark's words. "You didn't save me. You just paid the bills." Every time they echoed, something inside me tightened until breathing felt like work. I stared at my reflection in the dark glass of the bus shelter. My hair clung to my face, my skin looked drained, and my eyes were swollen from too many sleepless nights. I barely recognized the woman staring back. She wasn't Linda Morrison, the dependable nurse who always had a plan. She was someone stripped down to nothing but sheer will. A violent gust bent the rain sideways, soaking the last dry corner of the shelter. I gripped my suitcase, shaking, realizing with a clarity that bordered on brutal. No one was coming to save me. Not my husband, not my son, not my sister. For the first time in years, I was truly on my own. And yet, beneath the exhaustion and the fear, something warm flickered. Anger. Not the chaotic kind, not the kind that destroys. This was quiet, focused, almost calm. A flame small enough to cup in my hands, but strong enough to survive a storm. I didn't know where I was going. But I knew this, I would never beg for a place in someone else's life again. The rain hadn't let up for 2 straight days. It came down in heavy sheets that erased the sky, turning everything above me into a curtain of shifting gray. My suitcase was soaked through, my shoes squelched with every step, and the cold had settled so deeply into my bones that I felt hollow inside. I walked along the shoulder of the interstate, the headlights of passing trucks sweeping across my face before vanishing into the storm again. I didn't know where I was going. I just kept moving because stopping felt too close to giving up. When the small gas station appeared up ahead, its flickering neon sign looked like salvation. I pushed through the door, dragging a gust of wind in behind me. Warmth wrapped around me instantly, carrying the smell of coffee, motor oil, and wet asphalt. The man behind the counter lifted his eyes from a newspaper. "You're drenched," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "You all right, ma'am?" I nodded, though every part of me screamed otherwise. "Just needed to get out of the rain," I murmured, brushing my wet hair off my forehead. He pointed toward a small table near the coffee station. "Sit for a bit. I'll grab you a towel." I sank into the chair, listening to the rain beat mercilessly against the windows. A month ago, I still had a home, a life. Now everything I owned fit inside one dripping suitcase. My husband had taken my faith in people. My son had taken the last of my trust in family. What was left was something thin and stubborn, a thread stretched between survival and surrender. That's when I heard it, faint, barely there, a cry. At first I thought it was the wind, but then it came again, fragile and broken. I turned toward the door, my pulse quickening. The clerk looked up too. "You hear that?" I nodded and stepped back into the storm. Cold rain slapped my face as I scanned the parking lot. The sound came again, from behind the dumpsters near the far edge of the property. I hurried toward it, my shoes filling with water. When I rounded the corner, I saw her, a little girl, maybe 8 years old, curled against the wall, shaking so violently her teeth chattered. Her dress was caked in mud, her hair plastered to her cheeks. She looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Please," she whispered, her voice almost swallowed by the storm. "I can't find my daddy." For a moment, all the breath left my body. Her voice, small, cracked with fear, cut straight through me. I knelt beside her and held out my hand. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. What's your name?" "Maddie," she said, her lips trembling. "My daddy's looking for me." Her fingers were ice cold when they curled around mine. I helped her up and wrapped my coat around her shoulders. "Come on, Maddie, let's get you warm." Inside, the clerk, his name tag read Ray, grabbed a blanket from the back. "Good Lord," he said, draping it over her. Where'd she come from? She's lost, I said, my voice shaking. She needs something hot to eat, and dry clothes if you have anything. I reached into my bag and felt the small stack of bills I had left. $400, my whole lifeline. My hands trembled as I pulled out a 10 and handed it to Ray. Could I get her some soup and hot chocolate? He opened his mouth as if to refuse, but I shook my head. Please. While the microwave hummed, Maddie sat beside me, clutching the blanket around her. When the food was ready, she ate slowly, her little hands wrapped around the warm bowl. I watched her with my heart breaking. Between bites, she told me her mother had passed away last year, that she and her father had been at a park before the storm hit. Somewhere in the confusion and the crowd, she'd run the wrong way. When she whispered, "My daddy's really important," I almost smiled. "I'm sure he is," I said gently, "but right now, so are you." She looked up at me with big brown eyes full of trust. That trust hit me hard, because I'd given everything I had to people who didn't deserve it. And here was this child, someone I'd met 10 minutes ago, looking at me like I mattered. It reminded me of the call with Jason, the way he repeated Mark's words, the way he said, "Mom, you're always trying to control everything." I had worked myself raw so he wouldn't drown in debt, and now he spoke to me like I was the problem. I used to think that kind of rejection was the deepest pain a person could feel, but looking at Maddie, I realized something else. Deeper than pain was the instinct to protect, even when you had nothing left to give. Ray came over with 2 cups of hot chocolate. "On the house," he said quietly. I wanted to thank him, but my throat tightened. Gratitude and shame tangled painfully in my chest. I had always been the one helping, not the one needing help. Hours passed. The storm outside howled. Maddie eventually fell asleep, her small head resting on my lap. I brushed her damp hair from her forehead, fighting the urge to cry. There was such peace in her face, peace built entirely on the belief that I wouldn't let anything happen to her. The last time I felt that kind of trust was years ago, when Jason was little and used to climb into my lap after nightmares. "You're safe. Mom's here," I would whisper. Now I found myself whispering those same words to someone else's child. The realization washed over me. I had spent my entire life trying to save people who didn't want saving. My husband, my son, my sister. And yet here was someone who needed me. Someone whose world had cracked open just like mine had, and who was looking at me as if I were the only solid ground left. Ray dimmed the lights and turned down the radio. "Storm's not letting up anytime soon," he said. "You two can stay in the back room if you want." "Thank you," I whispered. I lifted Maddie in my arms, surprised by how light she was. When I laid her down on the small cot, she stirred and murmured, "Don't leave me." "I won't," I said softly. "I promise." Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, rattling the windows. I sat there in the dim light, holding Maddie's tiny hand, my other hand wrapped around the empty cup that had cost my last $10. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel poor. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt something like peace, because even in the ruins of my life, I had managed to do one good thing that truly mattered. When the rain finally stopped, it felt as if the whole world had paused, holding its breath, waiting. The morning light drifting through the gas station window was pale and exhausted, as though even the sky was too tired to shine. I woke stiff and sore in the chair, Maddie still asleep on the small cot beside me, her tiny hand curled around my wrist. For a moment, I just watched her breathe, the blanket tucked beneath her chin. There was a fragile kind of peace in that moment, until reality drifted back in. Ray walked in holding 2 cups of coffee. "Storm's over," he said, setting one in front of me. "News says there's an alert out for a missing child, could be her." My chest tightened. I'd known this moment would come. I looked at Maddie and whispered, "You're going home soon, sweetheart." We drove to the nearest police station in Ray's old pickup, the road slick and glistening from the storm. Maddie sat between us, holding my hand the entire way. As soon as we pulled in, 2 officers rushed out, their faces lighting up when they saw her. One spoke urgently into his radio while the other knelt down. "We've been looking for you," he said gently. Maddie smiled shyly and pointed at me. She found me. She helped me. Inside, the station buzzed with voices, phones, and footsteps. A woman from social services wrapped a fresh blanket around Maddie and handed her a juice box. They asked me to stay for questioning, to explain everything, from finding her behind the dumpsters to spending my last $10 on her dinner. The officer taking my statement listened carefully, nodding as he wrote. When he asked for my address, I hesitated. "I don't really have one right now," I said quietly. His pen stilled for a moment. Then he looked up. "Well," he said gently, "you're a good person, ma'am. You saved a child's life." The words hit harder than I expected. I couldn't remember the last time anyone had called me good. Not my husband, not my son, not even my sister. For so long, I'd believed being good meant giving away pieces of yourself until nothing remained. But this felt different. For the first time, being good hadn't destroyed me. It had helped someone else stay whole. About an hour later, the quiet outside shattered. A line of black SUVs pulled into the lot, tires slicing through puddles. Men in dark suits stepped out, scanning the area like security personnel. Then a tall man climbed out of the lead car. His face was pale, his eyes frantic with fear and exhaustion. "Maddie!" he shouted. Before anyone could stop her, she bolted toward him. He dropped to his knees, wrapping her in his arms, holding her so tightly it was as if he feared she might vanish. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I thought I lost you." The room fell silent except for Maddie's small voice saying, "I wasn't alone, Daddy. She helped me." She pointed straight at me. For the first time, the man looked up. He approached, still holding Maddie's hand. "You're the one who found my daughter." I nodded. My throat was tight. "I'm Andrew Carter," he said. The name rang a faint bell. Later, I'd learn he owned one of the biggest tech companies in Chicago. His voice trembled. "If you hadn't found her?" He stopped, swallowing hard. "Thank you doesn't feel like enough." I tried to smile. "She's a brave girl. I just did what anyone would have done." "Not anyone," he said quietly. "Most people wouldn't have stopped." The officers explained everything, how I'd found her, how long she'd been missing. Reporters were already gathering outside, flashes popping through the glass doors. The sudden attention made my skin buzz. I'd spent years being invisible, and now everyone wanted to see me. Andrew turned to me again. "I'd like to help you," he said gently. "You look like you've had a rough time. Please, let me do something." I shook my head. "You don't owe me anything. I'm just glad she's safe." But when he pressed his business card into my hand, I didn't refuse. "If you ever need anything," he said, "call me. I mean that." And he did. You could see it in his eyes. As he carried Maddie to one of the SUVs, something inside me shifted. There was joy. Yes, but also a sharp sting of resentment. Not at him, but at the people who should have cared about me the way this stranger cared about his daughter. My husband had walked away without a backward glance. My son hadn't called once, yet here was a man who would have torn the world apart to find his child. I stepped outside into the cold air, cameras flashing as they shepherded Maddie into the car. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. The officers offered me a ride to the local shelter, and I accepted. As we pulled away, I watched the line of black SUVs disappear into the distance. That morning, I didn't feel like the broken woman who had lost everything. I felt like someone who had survived something enormous, someone who had given meaning to another person's world. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, it didn't terrify me. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something I hadn't dared to imagine yet, something that finally belonged to me. A few weeks later, the snow had melted, taking with it the last traces of the storm that had changed everything. I sat in a bright, sunlit office overlooking Lake Michigan, the water glittering beneath the pale winter sun. The soft hum of the city below felt a world away from where I'd been just a month earlier. Cold, soaked, and alone at a gas station in the middle of a storm. Maddie sat across from me, coloring at a small table, her father speaking quietly with someone by the window. Every so often, she'd look up and smile, and each time, that small, warm bloom in my chest returned, the one I hadn't felt since before my life fell apart. After everything that happened, Andrew had managed to contact me through the shelter where I was staying. He'd sent a driver to bring me to Chicago, saying he wanted to thank me properly. I almost didn't go. A part of me still believed that good things weren't meant for people like me. Not anymore. But when I saw Maddie again, running toward me with open arms like we were family, I knew I'd made the right choice. Andrew offered me a position with a charity his company funded, helping families in crisis. "You have a gift," he told me. "You understand what people need when they've lost everything." His words didn't just comfort me. They healed something in me. Not because of the job, but because someone finally saw me, truly saw me. I accepted, not to start over, but to prove to myself that I could build something out of the pieces left behind. The work wasn't glamorous. I organized donations, spoke with families drowning in their own storms, and listened when no one else bothered to. Every story reminded me of who I used to be and who I refused to become again. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Mom, it's Jason. I saw the news about you and that girl. Can we talk?" My chest tightened. I stared at that message for days. The words looked sincere, but I knew now how to tell guilt from love. When I finally replied, I kept it simple. "I'm glad you're safe and doing well. I hope life's been kind to you." His response came quickly. "Are you mad at me?" I sat with the question for a long time before typing back, "No, Jason, I'm not mad. I'm just done being the only one who shows up." Then I set my phone down, and for the first time, the silence didn't ache. It just felt like closure. Mark tried too. A few days later, he left a voicemail that began with, "I heard about what you did," and ended with, "Maybe we could talk sometime." His tone was calm, almost casual, like he hadn't torn my life in half and walked away with someone else. I deleted the message before he finished. Some people only remember you when your name ends up in the news. There was resentment, yes, a quiet kind. Cool, precise. Every word from them reminded me how easily they'd erased me. Once I'd begged for their love. Now I didn't owe them even a conversation. One weekend, Andrew invited me and Maddie to his home for dinner. It was warm and bright, filled with laughter, the smell of fresh bread drifting through the rooms. Maddie told me about her new puppy, her voice bubbling with excitement. During dinner, Andrew leaned across the table and said, "You know, Maddie keeps calling you her hero." I smiled and shook my head. "I'm no hero," I said. "I just didn't walk away." Later that night, I stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the city. The cold air brushed against my skin, but I didn't shiver. I thought about the woman I used to be, the woman who sold everything for love that didn't last, who believed kindness had to hurt to matter. That woman had vanished somewhere in the storm. The woman standing there now felt lighter, stronger, quietly free. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Jason. I didn't open it. Instead, I powered the phone off and slipped it into my pocket. Below me, the city lights danced across the water, and then it hit me. Peace doesn't always come with answers. Sometimes it comes when you finally stop needing them. Behind me, Maddie's laughter drifted through the balcony doors. I closed my eyes and smiled. I wasn't alone anymore. Not in the way that used to hurt. If you've ever been left behind, if you've ever given everything and gotten silence in return, remember this. You can lose everything and still find yourself again. Sometimes the person you save is the one who ends up saving you too. And if you're still standing after the storm, you've already won.